As always, we will take a keynote presentation, and thereafter I will invite the panelists to do justice to the presentations. Of course, we all know that the GMD will be taking the keynote. Once it's done with the keynote, the GMD would proceed to other industry matters, while the panelists will take the center stage and begin to do justice to the presentation. Please, can we just settle down? Please settle down. If you've just come into the hall, thank you. Take your seat. We appreciate that greatly. It is 4:32. We're 2 minutes behind schedule. So without much ado, we're taking an industry remark on the COVID-19 and the oil price crash. What does it mean to refining, supply, and distribution of petroleum? That is what the keynote speaker will be addressing us on. Please let's welcome the Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Mr. Mele Kyari, as he addresses us on this keynote theme for the downstream and midstream session. Can I please welcome the GMD NNPC? GMD, sir.
Can see here? So, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My younger brother, Simbi, the manager of all local content, in all its definition. And my other colleagues, captains of industry, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me not bore you with long protocols. And of course, I've seen Chairman Katagum, and with respect, welcome, sir. I don't know where to start from, because this is after lunch. And after lunch, many things happen. So personal experience that it slows down my thoughts. And I hope it doesn't do this same thing to others. If it does, it will be really, really sound very boring. So let me change the perspective of this conversation a little bit more casual, and to see how this will help us. First of all, when you say oil price crash, as a result of COVID-19, today, we can't say oil price has crashed today, because today we're at $71 to the barrel, so oil price have actually rebounded. So this topic will be very appropriate 8 months ago, or 9 months ago, when we know that we are sub 40, and it indeed was a very, very big challenge. And I'm sure, without repeating what Secretary General OPEC said, at a point in time, we knew some jurisdictions have sold oil below zero. Literally, they have paid people to come and pick oil from them. So if that was the context, then of course it meant a lot to the industry. First, the pandemic brought a very great health crisis of magnitude that we haven't seen before, at least not in this recorded history that all of us have seen. Those of us who are alive have seen, because of course we have the flu of the 18th and so that's not what we're talking about. So we haven't seen anything like this. And of course, much more than the sickness, we haven't seen the reaction that the world collectively did when the COVID-19 came. So it brought huge consequences to our business. First of all, global economic crisis. Countries are literally doing subsidy on everything. And some countries don't even have the money to do that. And obviously, job losses and many things that we all know. But for our business, in the downstream, because downstream is always offshoot of the upstream, in the downstream, we lost demand. Once you lose demand and supply is not managed, prices will crash. So that's exactly what happened. And once you don't have a line of sight around demand, nobody will produce. That the first casualty is the upstream. So business decisions made to invest in the upstream were terminated. Some are deferred. Some have not come back on the table as we speak today. And of course, the refining business, where we expect that turnaround maintenance will be conducted, new plants will be put in place, continuing process of completing the plants that were being put in place. All of them became the easy, is it prey? Prey is not the right word. They became the victims of that circumstance. And therefore, there was general decline in putting money into processing work, processing business. And of course, there's an exception. Walter Smith didn't do that. But generally in the industry, people stop putting money into refining business. And of course, as you do this, the upstream guys, all of us, decide to cut our production. We haven't still gone back to that level. Just to put it in context, precisely on the 21st of April 2020, this country's production reached 2.49 million barrels per day, both crude oil and condensate. But as we speak today, we are struggling to make 1.8 for two reasons. Number one reason is that we are obeying and we are very happy aligning with the OPEC plus cut understanding. It serves our best interest because there's no point producing and you don't have market. But the second reason is that as we even try to come back on production, reservoirs don't work like water taps. So some refuse to come back. So some of our facilities, we're actually struggling to bring them back to business. So that's the collateral consequence. As a result today, with the best of intention, we are doing 1.7, 1.8 million barrels, both crude oil and condensate in this country. And of course, probably we are one of the few jurisdictions in the world that did not have massive fall in demand for petroleum products, particularly automated gas oil and premium metals for PMS and AGO. Let me use petrol. Let's call it petrol and gas. That's what we call it in this country. So it's the only country that has suffered just a very brief interlude of demand fall, and it came back because, as we all know, the lockdown didn't become a full lockdown in this country. It was a very brief period of time. After that, local transportation were practically sustained. And what happened in many jurisdictions didn't happen here. And therefore, there was a collapse in demand in our country, but it did come back, much quicker than any jurisdiction that I'm aware of. So the end result, globally, is that demand fell, people stopped investing. And therefore, we ran into crisis of supply that is now exceeding demand. And we're still battling with this. But I for sure that any day you have additional 3-4 million barrels per day of additional supply, as we speak today, you will see the price will go back to that sub-60 level. As we speak today now, there's some problem around stock, and that's why you are seeing the $71, $72 that is coming off. It takes less than 2 weeks for it to come back to that sub-level because the production hasn't come back. The production won't come back because, obviously, that gap that the COVID-19 created hasn't been filled back. It's very unlikely to it to be filled back because the reason is simple. We have been talking about transition issues, but much more than that, people's habits have changed. I'm sure as we're speaking, people are connecting from all over the world. In the past, they'll fly in and join us in this meeting, so now there's no incentive to do that. For all of us in business, we know that a number of our business meetings are now held online, and that means you're cutting down on transportation, even by choices. People don't even go to restaurants today, so you sit in your house, you call a driver. So you can see that those habits have now become convenient, and it's no longer issue of health or safety, but it's issue really of either convenience or of business necessity. So those volumes that we have lost, 4 or 5 million barrels per day, I don't see how this will come back. So if it doesn't come back and you don't invest on a continuous basis, and then people's habits continue to change, and economies are not able to come back, you are seeing third wave, second wave, still countries are locking down. And therefore, you'll continue to see gradual degradation of supply, and obviously that will be associated with demand. And the implication of this is that people will continue to refuse to invest both in the upstream and also in the downstream or midstream facilities. So what this has done to us is that it created massive disruption. And of course, it also created very serious security issues that we are all aware of. Once people go out of employment, facilities refuse to work, business refuse to invest, social considerations. Yes, we are doing very well in this country, but in many countries, they are unable to do many of these palliatives that we are able to do in this country. In every context, either material or cash transfers that we are doing in this country, many countries cannot do it. And not doing means you are creating a challenge of security, because when people are unemployed, they can do anything. And of course, the first option is crime. Despite all the religiosity that we have in this country, you can see that when people run into trouble, they jump to crime. But this is really an economic question that the COVID-19 price crash has brought. But so it's not really price crash, it's actually demand crash that it created. Of course, brought the price crash, and now we're managing the price. Everybody wants it to remain at 71. I'm sure the chairman of Walter Smith would like it to remain at 71. But if it does remain at 71, it creates its own problem. Because the reality is that price of petroleum products will go up, even in our local market here. We're managing this. There are issues around at what price do we sell and all this. There's an engagement going on that I'm aware of. I'm party to it. We haven't closed those engagements. But the reality is that it adds cost to this country's spending. And down the road, it creates a new set of problems for all of us. The best of forecasts has shown that prices of crude oil probably will continue to rise as long as we don't do the things that we should do in the upstream, and as long as investment into the midstream doesn't come back. We're making efforts, yes. You have seen that we have decided to rehabilitate our Port Harcourt refinery. We will do for Warrior and Kaduna, but not everybody is doing this. Actually, most refineries who are not doing well today, they are shutting down. And as you shut down, the supply of the finished petroleum product will continue to be challenged. And as that challenge comes up, you will see the spike in the price of crude oil, because there will be excess, there's demand that cannot be met by the supply that's happening. Now, the supply-demand balance now shifts from crude oil production, that even if you produce and you don't have refineries that can take it, then of course it's as good as well. You'll be forced, some kind of backward integration, you'll be forced to go back and shut down the upstream. So what we see happening is that people will buy less cars as we go forward. Because in very many developed countries, we're an exception. I've always maintained this. We're developing, we're growing middle class. Here we think buying a car is luxury, it's a sign that you have arrived. But it's not true, it's a means of transportation. So we haven't reached that stage. So we're maturing to that stage. So in this country, you will not see those declines. But globally, in most of the developed world, you will see that people will opt not to buy a car. So why would I buy a car? All these optics around EVs, you create the EVs and nobody will buy it. It's particularly young people, I call them the Yahoo generation, that many of them today, even the affluent one among those who are less than 30, car is not an issue for them anymore. Even building these massive houses that many of us build that we have no need for, they rather stay in block of flats. And this is really what is happening. So their choices are becoming very contracted, very narrow, and therefore, ultimately, it's going to affect our business because many of them don't even leave their homes. They think everything can be done from their homes. So as they don't go out, they don't buy cars, and you can make the EVs, but you will have no buyers for the EVs, particularly in the developed world. Now the growth will be here in our country, and of course in Sub-Saharan Africa. This with respect, I will just say that it probably is, that this may be true for Sub-Saharan African countries. We are still growing, very, very young economies, less infrastructure, massive gap of infrastructure, that will continue to be a market for our product. But as you do this, you must be aware that elsewhere, there's an opposite direction of things are going on, and it will affect what we're doing here. So it's like a sunset for this business. And the best of people or companies or country that are dependent on these resources are those who are able to manage their cost. They are more efficient. They know they have a focused market. And indeed, today when you produce crude oil, in the next 5-10 years, probably your market will be here, not out of this place. All the forecasts are showing that everybody is contracting, not because of the transition issues. I agree there are transition issues, renewable energy transition. Yes, absolutely true. But the second factor, which industry must now recognize, is that people's choices have changed. And it's almost irreversible. And once that category, assuming they take 3-4 million barrels per day, of those category of consumers, then you have a 3-4 million barrels that can never be filled back. And this is really what we are dealing with. So what do you do? In our country, for instance, in this instance, you have to look very, very short term. And that short term means probably not exceeding 10 years. And that's the impact it's going to have in our consumption pattern. We are very hopeful that the Dangote refinery will come up. It's a very different game here. We're very hopeful that Walter Smith will increase its capacity. We're convinced that we will fix our refineries. We're also convinced that a number of other small initiatives we are doing, 20, 50,000 barrels per day initiatives, will come to play. But ultimately, what would it do? You're going to be entirely a country that will no longer need import of petroleum product into the country. Therefore, you're going to be a net exporter of petroleum product. This is not more than 2 years away from now. If this happens, and it will happen, you will see the flow of commerce will change. Today, 70-80% of the product that we utilize in this country, Tunji, you are here, comes from probably a single port location, almost in one location. This reality is all coming from Europe. Even in Europe, it comes around Antwerp. So this will change. So the flow will change. That means, first of all, you have a growing population in Nigeria, growing middle class, not just population, a growing middle class who will see owning car and transportation as luxury, and it continues to be so for a while to come. But that means that you're going to have a market that is local. You're going to have the West Africa. I'm sure all of us are aware, those of us in downstream know that Nigeria's consumption is about 70% of West African consumption. So the market is here. At least 60. Let me be conservative. That means 40% of the supply that is hitherto coming from elsewhere. Of course, there are a few refineries around us here, but of course, there's nowhere near meeting any demand requirements. So we know for sure that when we become net exporters, that the West African market, and probably most parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, will depend on production from this country. So this will continue to grow because the same thing that is happening here and happening in very many other West African countries. Populations are growing, middle class is coming up. We are just trying to develop. So the choices we have are not EV choices, not electric vehicle choices, choices around combustion engine type of transportation mechanism, whether it's rail, train, whatever you're looking at, that you continue to have that market growing. So it did have impact. That's why I'm trying to separate the impact it will have here and elsewhere. Suppose here, capital allocation becomes a key issue for us to survive. Because we put your money in the right place. And this is what's happening. That's why even in N.I.P.S today, we're trying to see how do we manage our portfolio? What do we keep? Must you put money on every business? And one of my board members here, they asked us to do this. But the reality is that you have to manage your portfolios today. Whether you are in the midstream or in the upstream. And of course, you have to be efficient in your procurements. This is one of the things that COVID-19, price crash or price change or volume change, any name you give it, has brought to us. We realized at a point that we have to cut our costs. We engaged our contractors and insisted that we can't pay this. It's either you cut this cost or we forget about this project because we can no longer afford it. And cutting that cost means for some projects, maybe delays, contractor inefficiencies can come in, but that's the reality you're dealing with. And ultimately, the most impacted is the midstream processing businesses that we have. And I'm sure, Walter Smith, I don't know how you manage your contractors, but I know for sure that during that fall in the price of crude oil, that we did have challenge between some of our obligations. And therefore, we decided, what do we do? Let's go back to the upstream, bring down our cost to a level that we can manage, bring it so that, because if you are not efficient, you can do nothing. If you don't bring down your cost, you are in trouble. So one of the fallouts of the COVID-19 crisis is that we ended up demanding that cost must come down. When you're making more money, it won't bother you. But when you don't have the money, you really have to look at your cost and say, look, can I really do this? And of course, doing that means also making your choices. Probably during that period, only in this country, I think I with all respect, that processing business is funded anywhere else outside Nigeria is really very rare. That's why people are surprised that we could take FID on NLNG Train 7, it's a midstream processing facility, I'm sure we all know. We're able to award the Kotako Refinery rehab project. We're processing Warrior because it's really a matter of necessity for us. But elsewhere, it's no longer a necessity. If you are not a resource dependent, if you don't produce oil, you won't go and say, oh, let me start a refinery and buy crude oil and bring. Let me just wait. Nobody's putting his money in this. Let somebody process. I'll buy the product. After what difference does it make to me? So it's no longer a business by selection. It's business by circumstance that we find ourselves. And for us, we have relative advantage. We are close to the source of crude oil. That means you have issues around freight that is minimized for you. Yes, you do still spend money for transportation of petroleum or crude oil, but you spend less money. Therefore, processing here makes business sense. But it doesn't make business sense, for instance, another country, maybe, what country would I call that doesn't have oil? Can somebody help me around us here? Maybe Zaire. I think, there's any production in Zaire? No. There's none. So if Zaire say, I want to go and establish a refinery, it wouldn't make any business sense to start that. So that's the choices that businesses made in the midstream. And of course, so what else happened? Businesses started seeing things differently, and they have to do things very, very differently. People are adjusting their capacities, even in existing facilities, and that's why Walter Smith is trying to add additional train on the production facility. That's what every business is doing. So what improvement can I do? Can I add a desulfurization asset to what I'm doing? Can I add more facility? And so on and so forth. So every business is looking at the existing resources that they have to see how they can get some improvement. And of course, it's still tied to efficiency and cost cutting. Technology became the key thing in very many businesses, and most downstream businesses started automation that they didn't need to do 3 years ago. And it's working. Even for us, we have started the process of automating all our depots facilities, doing a BOT on our pipeline, and including the depots, and part of it is to introduce full-scale automation. Probably 3 years ago, you say, why should I put money on this? But today, it has become a matter of necessity for you to improve on your automation processes. And literally what it means is that the midstream and downstream companies are actually now investing in more of automation and adding efficiency. Because we know for sure that if you maintain the cost at where it is today, you will not be able to survive in this, because it has now become a very, very thin business. And Tunji is here. Every day I say, look, we're getting out of business. The margins are very small, and we really don't know how we can survive in this business. Therefore, you can't do anything until you bring in more of technology and automation. And of course, everybody has become strategic in this industry, even in the midstream and the processing. Everybody is strategic. I know for sure that very soon you're going to see mergers, acquisitions will happen, even in the midstream. They will happen because supply is maintained at a level that is below what we to know. Demand will continue to fall for two reasons. One is the energy transition issue. Secondly, because young people have made choices that they really don't need to own cars. Yes, in Africa, yes, very different story. But elsewhere, this is what is happening. And therefore, you will not have that market to buy your product. And because that market will not exist, you have to cut down your cost. You have to operate on a very thin margin. And therefore, the only way you can do is to pull together resources together and see how we can cut that cost. So, as you do this, I think it's very good to see what people think about what prices will look in the 4 years. When you say price crash, of course today is not, I'm sure it's not crash today. So you can't call it crash today. So we're at $71, $72 to the barrel today. But from all the perspectives I pointed out, the demand-supply balance will be a different story. We don't know what next will happen, but we know for sure that certain demands won't come back. At least 3 to 4 million barrels that is gone forever. It's not going to come back. So there is no space to add additional production for you to cover that. But when you do, the price will go back to what you saw in probably late April 2020. So that's what everybody is managing. And that's why when you produce, you must be sure that you are producing cheap and also that you have certainty of the market that you're going to deal with. And this is strategic decisions every business is making today. So everybody is saying price will remain at 50, 60. Of course, we all know it's voodoo business. I don't know if anybody from Plaza or August is here. But every guess is wrong. But you have a line of sight around what you think is possible. So we all believe that probably in the next 2 years, we could still be hovering around the $50 oil. It can't be lower than this. That's what everybody says. But we'll also not be surprised when it goes below that. But from what we see, from the choices people make, from the refusal to invest by very many businesses, from probably the lack of the right word to use, having very combative shareholders now, that in the market today, they call them, I don't know what, there's a name for it. Yeah, they're activist investors. They are becoming very prominent. Irrespective of the outcome, they say don't invest. So the cumulative effect of that over the next 3, 4, 5 years is that there will be positive investment in the upstream in particular, and of course also the midstream assets, and you will see that even when the demand is at this current level, you will have no supply to meet it. And therefore the prices can just be anywhere. So it will not be the 50 if that happens. If that trend continues, I hope that the boards of some of these lending institutions will understand this now quickly. But when we accumulate this, or accumulate this resistance for the next 5 years, I can tell you that crude oil can be at any price. In fact, all those charts will be wrong. And so what happened after that? Today, we are facing an industry that is thinking of what do we do next. There's no executive, I'm not sure many of them have left, but there's no executive in the upstream that will tell you for sure that in the next 3, 4 years, we'll have a clear investment plan in the fossil fuel business. It doesn't exist. They're all on PowerPoint. And taking it out of PowerPoint means that you need to go talk to the banks. And the banks are resisting, they are apprehensive, they are scared of the activist investors. They are, of course, the equity fund manager, these are people who have choices, and the choices are usually informed by emotions of the owners of the business. It's a very narrow group of people, so one person said, no, we won't do it, that's all. So what this has done to us as business, particularly in the midstream, product supply and demand, is that it has created probably extreme uncertainty that none of us here can tell what the outcomes will be tomorrow. But what is very certain is that we're not far from having a huge crisis of supply, and that is why we're taking the position that we're taking. We'll fix our refineries. We believe that the Dangote refinery will work. We have a number of other initiatives that are going on today. Walter Smith will support him to make sure that he brings back his plan, so that when that happens, we'll be in position of advantage. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. First, those of you, N.I.P.S will hosting a dinner at 7 p.m. So I'm inviting you, and it might be a very good opportunity to also have some chat, because by necessity, I would have loved to hear what my colleagues would say about what I say, but I have to leave. And I submit my utmost regrets and apologies. Thank you very much.
Can we please give the GMD another round of applause? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, so as the GMD leaves, we'll just go straight to the panel. But I want to ask for a small favor. I know we just came from lunch. The small favor is, can we just stand for 30 seconds to 40 seconds and just move our body a little bit? Let's kill any kind of boredom or distraction inside the body, so that when the panel comes up, we'll be alert and ready to listen. So let's loosen up a little bit. Yeah, Mama Flo, you know, you got it. I love it. You got it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that's it. Let's just, let the boredom go off, so nobody loses attention once the panel begins to discuss. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Please, you may be seated. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. Okay. There is a lost but found ATM card, and I would need the PIN number to find the owner. So please, if you're the owner, kindly give me the PIN number to identify you. Anyways, if you're missing your ATM card, let me know. Real quick, into the panel we go. Let's welcome the chairman, Morman, and MD 11 PLC, Mr. Tunji Oyebanji. He's on the panel. Let's please welcome him. Let's welcome the executive secretary, Petroleum Equalization Fund, Mr. Boboy Ahmed. He's on the panel. Let's welcome the managing director, Total Nigeria PLC, Mr. Imran Bari. He's on the panel. Let's welcome Mrs. Ngozi Oyewole, founder of Noxy Limited and the vice president of Commonwealth Business Women Network Nigeria. Let's welcome her. She's on the panel. Let's welcome the executive director, sales and marketing, N.N.P.S Retail Limited, Mr. Umar Aminu. He's on the panel. Let's welcome the president of the Arab Women Investors Union, Dr. Hoda Galal Yassar. She is on the panel. And completing our panel is the moderator for the panel, product and service manager for Schlumberger. Let's welcome Mervyn Azeta. And of course, let's welcome the managing director at Dover PLC, Olumide Adeosun. He's on the panel. Thank you, Mr. Adeosun. Okay, Mervyn, the show is yours. The timer is going to change from flashing to a time. That's the time for your session. Thank you very much. You can take it over, please.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. As you've heard, my name is Mervyn Azeta. I'm a product and service delivery manager at Schlumberger. I'm incredibly honored to be moderating this session today, and I hope that this conversation will be one that creates amazing insights about the downstream and midstream sector. And we leave here with very insightful thoughts about what the future of the segments of this industry is. As we've seen from the conversations we've had previously, and including the keynote that we just heard from the GMD, these segments of the industry, like the upstream, have suffered a significant blow from the twin shocks of COVID-19 and the price war. And we're hoping that with the conversation, we'll see the solutions that we can adopt to get us out of those issues that we've seen. We've seen companies see demand shortfall with volatile margins. We've seen numerous supply chain issues. And all of these have posed a threat to business continuity in the sectors. The question now is, how do we buck the trend, and how do we capitalize on the midstream and downstream renaissance? And there couldn't have been a better and even balanced panel to discuss the subject today than these speakers that we have up here. We've got the government, we've got the regulator, we've got the private sector, including investors and entrepreneurs represented, which I find very interesting. Without further ado, let's begin with Mr. Umar Aminu. So we heard from the GMD of NNPC. In this decade of gas, to survive the sunset, it's imperative that we mobilize bold, strategic actions driven by multi-stakeholders, cooperation or collaboration. We need to deploy coherent and integrated policies supported by strong institutional mechanisms and innovative technologies to create value, as well as deliver sustainable development for the nation. But I would love to hear a nuanced and pretty objective perspective from NNPC Retail Limited, which is pretty much a focused arm of the NNPC in the downstream sector. What could be the enablers of transformation in the downstream business?
Good afternoon, distinguished delegate. Thank you, Marvin. The question raised is key. And the GMD of NNPC, who my boss who has just left, has set the context in relation to this. For us, as a retailing outfit, the bottom line that drives the downstream enablers are basically the availability of product as at when it should be. And he has set the context by saying in country, we will need to be thinking through ensuring the development of an in-country refining capacity. What that means is that the downstream business will be so attractive in a manner whereby you are able, at the first instance, to have product as at when you should have them as a driver of the business. That being said, key point to note is about the role of legislation. We're glad to hear that sooner or later we'll have an enabling legislation in the context of the Petroleum Governance Bill, as it were. That will obviously further give impetus to developing or encouraging investment in the downstream, which is critical to the reform agenda within the downstream subsector. Now, there is also the issue of government itself putting a deliberate policy to drive the downstream. And I give you an instance, whether there have been discussion around energy transition, be it as it were, we are players. Whatever it comes in, our role is to ensure energy security for Nigeria and beyond. Whatever it is, if it is a fossil fuel, we will have them, develop them at the market that needs them. If it is the renewable, we are already strategizing in the context of the NNPC, as it were, to begin to think beyond today. So by and large, these are key enablers for us. And then of course, you need to look at the role of IT and automation. We have gone through ensuring the automation of our process end to end, including the forecourt. We've applied what we call intelligence, that is artificial intelligence, to be able to ascertain what each and every one of you, what is your right, is your value. Did you take it right? If you've not taken it right, it's a right for you to question that. So these are all enablers that those of us who are in this business are already putting in place to ensure that Nigerians have value for their money. Thank you very much. If there is any further, I can...
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. I like the fact that you highlighted some of those things that are really critical, like, policy or legislation, technology adoption, very interesting stuff. I will move on now to Mr. Barry. I'd like to hear the IOC perspective on what the IOCs can be doing to capitalize the opportunities that we have today in the midstream and downstream sector presented by the energy transition. So the energy transition has forced many stakeholders to rethink their position across the industry value chain. Some companies like yours have been transformed into integrated energy companies looking at different pieces of the energy industry. And they're also looking to actively play in the midstream and downstream sector. So from an IOC perspective, what do you think should be done to capitalize on all these opportunities that the transition is presenting, and what holistic and integrated solutions should be deployed to responsibly capture value? We heard that from the GMD this morning. There's a responsibility bit, right? And how do we maximize all the investments that we're going to be making or already making in these sectors?
Thank you. This is the kind of question you can't even ask for breakfast because I'm sure the brain will still be sleeping. No, I will just take, so good evening, everyone. Just take things from different perspectives. Talking about perspectives, when you are sitting down there, you are watching the panel, and from here, it's totally different. I can see a countdown. I don't know what's happening. It's going very fast. No, just to say quickly that from the customer perspective, I've never heard anyone asking, what am I doing, me, as a customer, in terms of energy transition? We're talking about CO2 emission, everything, but who is emitting the CO2 after all? It's us. I'll just give an example. In a European country, this is where statistics are available, a citizen emits 12 tons of CO2 per year, which is something around 34 tons of kilo of CO2 per day. So every day of God, you emit 34 kilo of CO2. Now, if you travel by airplane for 1,000 kilometers, the plane will emit 22 tons. And if you have in a flight of 200 people, you will have emitted something around 110 kilo for just one trip. So it means that for one trip you would have done as a customer, you would have spent 3 days of your budget of CO2 emission. It means that for 3 days, you have no right to eat, you have no right to shower, to brush your teeth, because when I'm talking about kilo per person, even the food you are eating has emitted some CO2 during the production. So from the client perspective, the biggest challenge for all companies actually, is how to ensure that you contribute to net zero with what they call the scope 3. Scope 3 of CO2 is the CO2 emission stemming from the end user, the people who are buying your products. So it's really the biggest challenge for us, for all of us actually, because 85% of the emissions from petroleum products are coming from usage, not from the production, not from the transport. So upstream has done a lot, they are doing a lot, not to emit. If it's impossible to emit less, and if it's impossible to reduce, to capture and to store, then you will have to move the product. But at the end of the day, on the downstream sector, you are the one who will be accountable for what your end user are using. So that's why the challenge for us is how to help our clients to do this transition. So it's why Total Energies is saying that our ambition is to be at net zero by 2050, together with the society, not alone. Thank you.
Yeah, it has to be people-centric. Thank you so much for that. So I move on now to Mr. Oyebanchi. You're just right here. So one of the priorities of the federal government we've heard in a decade of gas is to ensure the safe, efficient, and sustainable development of the midstream and downstream sectors. It's very clear. But beyond safety and efficiency, I believe that they must be resilient and able to deliver significant value to all the stakeholders and even to the citizens of the nation, attracting investments and driving profitability across the value chain. What frameworks do you think would be required to make this happen?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. I had to keep on sounding like a broken record. I will go back again to PIB because as far as I'm concerned, if we are forward-looking, if we are looking at a a new post-COVID era with new legislation, I think that is the most fundamental framework we can be talking about as far as our industry is concerned. We are, I think, particularly on the downstream side, a bit like students who have studied hard for an exam, and we are waiting for the exam day, and we are hoping and praying that when we get to the exam hall, the questions that will come out will be the questions that we prepared for. I'm sure you have all, or you can remember instances where students will go into an exam, and when they see the questions, they will hit their head and say, my village people have pursued me here. Because all the questions they prepared for do not come out. And that is why we talk about the PIB being the framework that will help us to deliver all those things we have talked about. So we are hoping, because the process so far, I must say, from the downstream side has been a bit concerning in that at the presentations at the National Assembly, we barely had 5 minutes to make our input. So we have no idea what the result is going to be like. But what we are hoping for is a result that would help to have, one, a level playing field, a result that will help to have a legal framework that is consistent with all the existing policies, the gas policy, the petroleum policy. We don't want a law that will come out and be inconsistent with all those other policies that have been well articulated and are already in place. We don't want a policy that will, or a legislation that will create new monopolies from the old monopolies that we may have had in the past. We look for a legislation that will create a level playing field, a legislation that will ensure that consumers are protected. All these are the kind of things that ultimately will provide the kind of wins and attract the investment that is necessary to capture all those good things, that those opportunities that we spoke about. Because if we don't have that kind of legislation, then I'm afraid those opportunities will be there. We will not have the kind of environment that will encourage collaboration, partnerships, and things like that. Already, there's so much uncertainty. The GMD talked about all the uncertainty coming out of the post-COVID period. So the worst thing for us to have would be legislation that will further add to that uncertainty. So if we have a clear picture of how this legislation will help us in the future, then I think we'll be in a better position to capture all the opportunities, be it technology, be it collaboration among ourselves, be it transition to the new gas environment that we want to go to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Policy is clearly an enabler for development in the midstream and downstream sector, and we'll come back to the PIB discussion later. But just to be fair to the gender representation on here, I would direct my next question to a female. And I'm going to be asking Mrs. Ogewole a question. Having seen the significant disruption COVID brought to supply chains around the world, how destructive that can be, especially for developing economies like our own, I'm curious to know what strategies could be adopted to transform the supply chain for the midstream and downstream sector, and what businesses like yours are doing today to ensure resilience in the face of future disruptions to supply and industry value chains.
It's a pleasure to be here today. I mean, being an entrepreneur. However, I always say that a woman is the best person to run the midstream and downstream business. And as a manufacturer, yes, a lot has happened to us. The COVID has actually affected us, but then the strategy of being a woman and putting things, sometimes common sense process delivers you safely. So one of the many things we did in manufacturing, because we manufacture PPEs, coveralls. So what we do is go down to the root of where you get your raw materials and plant yourself there. That reduces the distance from where you move your goods to where you deliver it to the end rate. So that clock that is ticking so much is making me nervous, because if you leave me, I'll talk. But I managed to scribble down a couple of points to help me, since I was one that is time-bound. So you have to put, like I said, a flexible supply chain process, collaborative outsourcing. You can't do everything. You need to go on. Get people who are able to collaborate with you, give it to them, and they'll deliver. Because, you know, during the COVID lockdown, we were not able to deliver to the users in the rigs. We relied so much on the government agencies that were given permission to move around, even though we were told, if you're an essential product supplier, but that limited to certain people. So I think the logistics company were the perfect people to collaborate with to get that done. We also had efficient management of our products. And then we had a relationship with, and coordination. So a lot of those disruptions we had were managed. Small businesses were easy to manage. The bigger ones I would not be able to go into. But using my company, we're a hybrid company. We were able to manage collaboration. We're able to manage putting processes in place. We're able to manage getting the raw materials from source. We're also able to have a proper understanding between our clients and us.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That's very good. I'm glad you were able to beat the disruption and move on with the business. Thank you. Now, back to the PIB question that I had in my mind. So, Mr. Baboy, the PIB seeks to merge your organization with the PPRA to create a single regulator called the authority. And this authority is expected to regulate the commercial and technical operations of the midstream and downstream sector. I'm curious to know how you see this changing the dynamics at play just now in the sector to deliver profitability for all players, and what sort of initiatives will be developed to address the challenges of getting petroleum products from the upstream sector to the consumers, or simply just managing the balance between supply and demand.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Petroleum Equalization Fund Management Board was established to administer uniform pump price of petroleum products nationwide. Now, PEF has been doing this since 1975, and the idea has been to get stability in the pricing of the products so that it will reduce inflation and other attendant effects of the volatility in the market. PF has been doing this by reimbursing oil marketing companies for transporting the products to their outlets and selling at government-approved prices for this while using manual methods. These manual methods have been found to be cumbersome. They have been found to be inefficient, and it causes a lot of bureaucracy and other bottlenecks. PF operated this manual method by capturing the loading of products at the depots of loading manually, doing the same at the receiving end manually, processing the marketer's claims manually, and paying them through checks manually. This is very cumbersome. And about 9-10 years ago, we resorted to automation. Automation so that it will increase efficiency, it will increase transparency, so that the marketers who transact the business will be paid on time, and they will go back and load and come and sell again. The consumer will also be given the opportunity to get the product on demand, avoid scarcity in the supply and distribution of the products. Now, PEF started automation around 2012 by Aquila. Aquila particularly captures this product at the loading end and also at the receiving end. But in between, there is a gap. And after receiving at the depot received, there is also a gap before it gets to the outlet of the marketer to sell. Recently, about 2-3 years ago, we resorted to improvement in the technology that we have been using by bringing about the downstream automated fuel management system, which we call the DOWNSTREAM. DOWNSTREAM is made, DOWNSTREAM is brought about to improve on the gaps that we have noted in the operation of Aquila. So now, when the technology comes into full effect by the end of this year, we would have been capturing the product and loading and all the way real time up to the end to the depot of receiving and up to the point of the outlet of the marketer before we pay the marketer. This is done so that we ensure products are delivered at the destined locations on time before we pay. Now, PF essentially is seen to be maybe not quite a regulator in this case, but a fund manager. We have been operating this all the while. The PIB now seeks to merge PF and PPRA. PPRA is a regulator because the R in the PPRA is prominent, regulatory price, regulatory agency. Now, this is what government desires to do, and definitely, as you said, there must be some innovation in some way to try to merge the functions of the two agencies and see how we can deliver on the new mandate. The new mandate is still not very clear because it depends upon what comes out of the PIB from the National Assembly, because that is when we'll know exactly what it is. But for now, there have been proposals on how to go about the merger in the midstream and downstream. As we wait for the outcome of the PIB, as the chairman of MOMAN says, you read for an examination, at the end you don't know what comes out. So. Thank you. I want to say that we are a public agency, government agency. Whatever government says we are going to do. Obviously, the crop of staff we have in PEF, well-trained. The type of equipment we have, the automation that I mentioned, is well-grounded. We are ready, obviously, to transform and provide adequate and valuable service to Nigeria. Well, obviously, I want to emphasize here that government tries as much as possible to reduce cost of governance by reducing the cost of doing business. Let me say here that government does not draw, PF does not draw from the public treasury. We are self-funded. So whatever we do in carrying out our functions is based on the self-funding that we have in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those interesting insights into the PEF. Thank you. I'd like to take some questions from the audience, but just before I move on to the next panelist, I'd like some people to indicate interest in asking questions so that they can get the mics to you, and then we'll come back to you when we're ready to take your questions. So my next question goes to Mr. Adeosun. For a country which relies heavily on fuel imports for its domestic fuel needs, having functional refineries is certainly critical and transformative. However, there are concerns about whether or not we should be investing in those same refineries which have operated sporadically in the last few years and incurred more losses than benefits for the nation. So as one who is known to have extensive knowledge of refining, having contributed to leading industry publications on the subject, I really do want to hear your thoughts on this. Further investments worth it? That's the first question. I'll add the second one. Should the government be advised to best leave refining to other players like the private sector? And what do you think we can do differently to revive, the moribund and much maligned oil refining sector?
Thank you, Mervyn. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So a few years ago, actually 5 years ago to be precise, I wrote a paper when I was at PwC. The paper was called The Refining Revolution, the Case for Modular Refining. I wrote that paper because having looked at the landscape in Nigeria, it was very obvious that there's a simple problem we have, which is that we don't, even though we have the infrastructure to do it, or even though we had invested in the infrastructure to do so, we were not monetizing our barrels, and we're therefore losing a lot of value as a country. And so the paper was written in the spirit of two things. One, just to kind of make the point around the loss of value, but also to attract investors to come to Nigeria and look at the opportunity landscape for refining, especially the modular variety, since that was much smaller. I'm not going to be needing that anymore. But that was not such a different time. That was not such a long time ago, but it's a very different time from now. The story of this country and refining started in 1965. By 1965, we could refine 38,000 barrels of crude out of PH1. In the years that followed, we built it up to an impressive 445, which is the third largest refining capacity in Africa. So we built it up. We planned well for it. But somehow, over the course of time, we lost whatever the magic was that allowed us to refine, and we let the refineries completely go to fallow. And it breaks my heart because in the title of this talk, there were two words. There was moribund and what's the other M?
Much maligned.
Much maligned. It's terrible. We should not be here at all. Now, in that paper, I identified 4 things 5 years ago that were the barriers to us actually becoming a refining hub and a refining center of excellence for the region. There was a regulatory issue. It was important that before anybody invests any money in Nigeria, they need to have a clear line of sight to how they're going to recoup their investment. At the time, security was a concern. It was a slightly different security concern, but it was a security concern. Then it was about piracy, the Niger Delta, illegal refineries, but it was a concern nevertheless. Infrastructure was an issue. There was always going to be challenges around how you move products from these coastal refineries, which is the best place to locate them, into the hinterland. And then the last concern was really around how much feedstock will you have access to. And my firm belief then, as it is now, is that if you crack those 4 things, we'd be on our way. But underpinning everything is that matter of giving investors confidence, and that's getting the regulation right. My Egon and chairman of MoMan has mentioned already that it's absolutely important to codify it. So without codification of this, no, it's not very attractive. And I think the only people that would be interested in making that investment would be Nigerians that trust the system. Now, unfortunately, and I think the GMD kind of alluded to it, the kind of monies, and I am pluralizing it because it's a lot, the kind of monies we need to reactivate our refining in a really meaningful way is significant, and it's the likes of which cannot be found on these shores. So the signal we must send to the external world is one of, this is a great investment destination, your money will be preserved here, and there's absolute value to be gained. But let's look at where we are today as a refining country. The 445 refineries that we have, so it's Warri 1, PH1, PH2, Kaduna, and Warri. Of all of those, production has been 0. And I think I would not be exaggerating if I say that. Neither would I be underestimating what has been produced there. It's been 0. We have spent 961 million naira between 2007 and 2017 in a program of TAMS, turnaround maintenances, around these assets. That works out to about $96.1 million a year. The net effect of all this investment is that we're running those refineries jointly at a cumulative loss of $125 billion naira. So there's a challenge there, and there's an opportunity to be had. The upside coming up is that we've now heard that these refineries will be looked into. So I'm now getting to answer one of your questions. I absolutely believe those refineries must be revived in some way. It's good that we have the Dangote refinery coming up, and the scenario I built in my paper was around 3 refining sources, the Dangote refinery being the principal, the 4 refineries being worked to different levels of utilization, and the third was I pulled all of the modular refining applications, ATCs that we have in play. And those were going to be 3 of them. Unfortunately, for all the scenarios, none of those scenarios in 5 years' time they were meant to have delivered. None of those scenarios have delivered. I said that we started refining 38,000 in 1965. So to answer question number 1, I do not think that given the track record the government has in running these commercial assets, these technical commercial assets, and given the tendency for politicization of crude oil, which is the main feedstock into this, I do not think the government is the right entity to be running it. And I think we will see, and this is, I'm not telling tales out of school, neither am I providing any deep insight, but we will see that actually when the Dangote refinery comes on stream, its ascent will probably be consistent and will be on the up. So I think we should hand over all refining to the private sector, and the government focuses on doing things like regulating the sector, providing oversight, monitoring, and focusing on anti-competition type practices. In the hands of the private sector, it's very clear what's going to happen. The refineries will be run for profit or on a for-profit basis. We will see there'll be much more transparency in the way the refineries are being run. And transparency clearly is very much in line with the NNPC's, I think, successful tape agenda. So I think it's absolutely critical that happens. The other thing is that we will actually start to see some interesting innovation as well in the field, because what's happening right now in the industry is that innovation, as is always the case, innovation always moves at a higher rate than regulation. Now, regulation hardly keeps up, but the regulation, when it's served best, it's nimble enough, it tries to catch up. But when innovation is far ahead and regulation can't even catch up, then we have a fundamental problem. So to close, I'm going to circle back and say regulation is absolutely fundamental. And it needs to be codified and available to us, to everybody. It needs to level the playing field. It needs to make it absolutely even, such that if I am NNPC Retail and I'm Adova PLC, even though NNPC Retail is the child of NNPC, it cannot have an unfair advantage over me or any of my peers either. And then lastly, it's absolutely critical that we look at these things as common logistical pools. What do I mean by that? It's important that when a refining asset is built, if I have a field and I'm not an investor in that field, there might be some mileage, or if I build a pipeline to evacuate products, it will be quite useful if all the players, as long as they pay the admission price and the ticket for entry, are allowed to use that asset, either on a tolling, on a metered, or any other basis. Because again, it's in that true capitalism and democracy lies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michel Adesun. You spoke a lot about investments, and I would like to now direct my focus to the last but not the least panelist, Dr. Yasa. So my question to you, and is really just to give an investor's perspective. We've had some of the issues that are plaguing the midstream and downstream sector today, as well as the initiatives or solutions or reforms that we need to get things moving in the right direction, particularly to buck the trend. But I wonder, could there be something that we're overlooking right now? And coming from an investor's side, would you be open to investing? How do you encourage your fellow investors to come in and invest just now?
Good evening, everybody. For starting, I want to say something very important, clear, short. Number one, to attract investor, we need, number one, a clear and very appropriated law for investment. Number two, what is the facility and what is the advantage offered to investors to come to Nigeria to invest in the country? It should be clear, 1, 2, 3 points. This is what I need really. Number three, where and how it will be the security. You all know, maybe some rumors or whatsoever, we as Arab investors and me as Egyptian and had the Arab Women Investors Union, which will represent 22 countries. We know, we heard a lot, but we want to have some specific answers. Number four, we want to know also, if we came and we make an investment for a project, how it will be facilitated for us to take out of the country our benefits, the flow of the money, it will be easy. And the advantages I'm telling you, the infrastructure, and also indication from your side, where is, we heard a lot of people came to us and tell us, this area is very good for investing. No, that area is much better. We need to have something more clear for us, where to invest, what is the law, what is the advantage, what is the privilege to have as Arab investors to come to your country. Especially me, I'm speaking as Egyptian because we have a very, very clear instruction from our President Fattah al-Sisi to go Africa, and maybe very special also Nigeria. That's why I'm here today. And please, all of us, give a clap to our President Fattah al-Sisi, who really love Nigeria. And they said very clear, yes, thank you. Yes, it was very clear for us that go to Africa, go Nigeria, it's an opportunity. There is a lot of importance of collaborating and start to build a real bridge between the Arab and the Africans through Nigeria and Egypt. And really, I'm here for this and ready. We are ready to come. Please support us with more details, specific details. It will be really our pleasure, as I'm telling you on the 13th. We are ready. I want to give you thanks for the women on the Commonwealth, because they were the one who sent me, very insisting for me to come here. And I present this invitation to our head in Egypt, and they said, yes, you should go. Nigeria is very important to Egypt and to the whole Arab region.
That's pretty impressive, and it's interesting to know that, you have that ambition as well. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I would now like to take questions from the audience. I remember seeing a hand up there, okay? So not to be gender biased, I probably take the female question first, and then I'll take the guy just behind her. Yes. Can we have the mic given to her, please? So please say your name, who you're directing the question to, and make it short and sweet. Thanks.
Okay. My name is Chidi Maubi. I am the Managing Director of Dindo Energy Services and Resources Limited. Mr. Deloshu, my question is to you. I heard your figures for fixing the refineries, and the money that have been going, in my own assumption, down the drains through the years. Instead of fixing, if you had driven a Tokumbo car, after some time, you just say, why don't I save money and buy a new one, right? So all these monies, plus the ones that we are spending, the ones that we have spent have gone. Can't we re-strategize and say, instead of fixing to sell, come and buy as it is, and then government builds a new one. These are things that agitate my mind when I read, when I see it, and I think a forum like this should address those issues instead of dancing around what we've been hearing. Can't we build one new refinery as a country. Yes, partner with Dangote. The people that we've given modular refineries over and over the years, I don't know what's happening with them. Don't even partner with them. It's PPP, right? Let the private sector who says we can raise money to do refinery. Since we say that we are consuming PMS and we continue for the next 20 years, please, can't government save us money? Tell the people, the investors who want to buy, come and buy as it is and fix it.
Okay, thank you. Let's take the next question and then we'll just answer together.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
I am Comrade Umar Ibrahim Maudo, a student from a prestigious University of Technology, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University, Bauchi, student of applied geology in the university, and currently working with Musuwat Gidat Nigeria Limited here in Abuja. My questions goes, I listened to the presenters, all of them, and I have something to tip up on the presenters, most especially the PEPS.
Please go to your question, please.
The PEPS director.
Okay.
The secretary of the PEPS. Some of the syllables in the universities, I would like some agencies, petroleum industries, both private and government, to be monitoring the syllables that students will be given in the institution so that they will produce a productive, talent student that will come and work in such organizations. That's one. Number two, as a PEP secretary in Nigeria, I am a 400 level student of geology, but I have never heard about such organizations. Why can PEPs and such oil and gas industries to be sending their adverts to all the universities that are taking courses related to the oil and gas industries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me just take one more question and I will, yes, so the lady in red, please.
Good afternoon. Sorry. My name is Dolapo Kulaja-Kotsun. I'm an executive director at Ikwana Refinery. We're actually attempting to build a refinery in Akwa Ibom. We started this journey 6 or 7 years ago. It's been an absolute nightmare, but we pursue it because we are passionate, because we believe that there is actually no value added to just exporting our crude, because the value added is when we refine it. I know a lot of people are against modular refineries, but not everybody has the billions that Dangote does. But the thing is that we do need to improve and enhance our domestic capacity so that we can secure our energy. And quite recently, we formed an organization called the Crude Oil Refiners Organization of Nigeria, and we are being supported now for the very first time by government. It's very, very encouraging, but Mr. Adoshin, this question is to you. Your analysis is brilliant, but what is the implementation of all your analysis? What is the best way for us to go forward so that we stop, taking 2 steps back, 10 steps behind, whereas private investors are like me, we are spending our money, we're not getting any returns. We've been on it for 5, 7 years. You know the process of getting these licenses. It's not cheap. And return on investment, it's very discouraging. For people like Dr. Hodder now, listening to what we are saying, they actually do want to come to Nigeria. So what is the answer? How do we implement so that we can move forward, stop all the talk and start implementing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I think you just go with it. Thanks.
Much. Mrs. Obi, I think, was the first question. Yeah, I think the government is doing exactly what you've suggested. It's just that it's taking, some might say it's taken way too long to arrive at this, where we are. I think I heard GMD, if I'm not mistaken, say that they were going to, they had a private sector consortium together and they were looking at
rehabilitating the refineries. I believe that's what he said. So in terms of, we can't cry over the money that has gone. Like the man said, it's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So to the extent that the government is doing something about it, and there are private consultants, I think that's really what can be said for those big conventional refineries. They're not as flexible as the others. We can only lament on what has gone in the past, which is why I'm saying perhaps, I think it's very clear now that let's let the private sector do the operations and the running of these things.
Okay.
To the second question, sorry, ma, I didn't catch your name, Mrs. Khotun. Yeah. So the point of the analysis 5 years ago was to spur some action, was to provide investors a roadmap of sort, a cheat sheet to get there. At the time I did the analysis, the price of crude oil was $54, which gave you a return. I don't know how big your refinery is, but for a modular, you would have had a 2.6-year return. So if you had started building that refinery just then and you found cash for it, you would have paid it off by now. You'd be enjoying smooth sailing. I'm very sorry to hear of your travails with the process. I think that sounds like a bigger issue needs to be addressed there, because my firm belief is that it is going to take everything to make it work. You have a monolith refinery situated in one end of the country. That means we'll be relying heavily on road transportation to move everything into the hinterland. It's at the most southern, western part of the country. So it's as far away from Borno as it could ever be. For the conventional refineries, we know where they are. We know where Kaduna is, and we know where Warri and Port Harcourt are. So that gives some relief. But what modular refineries do when they're situated close to the feedstock is they give us these cottage-size, smaller installations that you can litter along the West African beachfront, such that each one has a captive market, and people don't have to come from 10,000 miles to get to you, and you serve your local area. So there's room for every type. And I'm very happy to hear that you're persevering with your project. I'm also happy to hear of projects like Watersmiths that have landed, the Anambra one, and there's one in it. There's quite a few of them, and I hope that they all get realized, because combined is how we solve the problem. We don't have time, but it would have been useful to hear what your specific challenges are, so that other players can learn from it. So I think perhaps it'd be useful to catch up after this to hear what your very specific problems are. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. You will agree with me that the panelists have done a fantastic job, so please give them a round of applause. And you can take it away now, Richmond. Please invite the guy who's going to wrap up. Thank you.
I do not think there's a question unanswered. Which question is that? Who was he addressed to?
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Who's the question addressed to? Who was your question addressed
to? So, Mr. Boboy, could you answer the question?
To Mr. Boboy? Mr. Boboy, please. If you can please, sir, do that in 1 minute. We'll appreciate that, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, I think it's an undisputable fact that any knowledge that cannot be applied is a waste. Now, while designing the curricula in the institutions, either the universities or polytechnics, I think the designers need to take cognizance of the needs of the society. Now, that is why government deliberately established the Petroleum Technology Development Fund to do that, and I think they are doing very well. So I want to advise that maybe you get the management of Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University to get in touch with PTDF, and not only to monitor the courses in the, but to also go ahead and do what I would call graduate tracer. After training the students, you go out, you are serving, the university management should follow you to the fields where you have been working to see whether what they have taught you, the universities or polytechnics, are really relevant to the needs of the society. Thank you.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Boboy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mervin. Thank you, Tunji. Thank you, Lumide. Thank you, Baboy. Thank you, Imran. Thank you, Ngozi. Thank you, Umar. And thank you, Hoda. Thank you. Captain Emmanuel is not here. So because we have a lot to do this evening, we won't even bother with the wrap-up. We'll just go ahead and close the evening. Before we present the appreciation to you, let me make a few announcements. The first one is that all speakers, please, you find time this evening or tomorrow to the speaker room. Go to the speaker's lounge. We have provided a plaque for you for speaking at this year's N.I.P.S. So just find time when you can, go to the speaker's lounge and grab your plaque. Secondly, all presentations from this event will be uploaded after the event. The event ends on Thursday. So sometime from Friday, if you go to www.nigeriapetroleumsummit.com, you would have access as a delegate to all the presentations that has been given here from yesterday when we started. Once again, is the event platform, or you can also download the Brevity Anderson app. I hear that every registered delegate has the app and knows how to navigate the app to gain access. So on the website and on the app, you would find all the presentations that has been given here. Now the GMD has invited for the dinner this evening. I'd like to just make a second point that dinner, on his direction, of course, I never speak on my own capacity. It's strictly by invitation. It's a dinner, a small dinner, as a matter of fact. If you were at the Sunday's dinner, you will appreciate the fact that it's a small hall. It's a small dinner where it's going to be strictly by invitation. I've been asked to just reiterate that it will be you only be admitted if you have the invite for the dinner. However, we're going to be having the drinks reception sponsored by ExxonMobil once we rise from here to that place, and from there we'll proceed to those who have the invite will proceed to the dinner, the NMPC dinner. That said, Permanent Secretary, sir, if you may please proceed and present the plaques gifts to our panelists. Let's please give them a round of applause. Go ahead. A few years ago, I'm coming. A few years ago, we did a small unofficial study, and we calculated the number of barrels that will be consumed by all proposed modular refineries, and it came to somewhere nearing 2 million barrels per day. And some of those refineries have gone live in the last year, and more will go live this year and next year. So definitely, we're gradually getting to that place when we will become self-sufficient when it comes to downstream products, the finished products of the industry. We're hoping that in the next few years, we'll totally stop importations. It's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. It's going to happen. Yeah, group photograph, please. Group photograph. Please take a quick group photograph. Please take a quick group photograph. Thank you. Okay, so tomorrow is the 4th day of the conference. Tomorrow is Wednesday. The 4th day of the conference. We will start tomorrow's session at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. please is our core time for tomorrow, but you can come in if you want at 7:30 to 8:30, where we'll be having the sponsored coffee networking by Walter Smith. That's where 9 a.m. tomorrow is when we're starting. We'll go from there to the oil and money session. And of course, we will go from there to the offshore and marine energy session. The workforce for the future is also on for tomorrow. The Exxon networking break is inside the exhibition hall. Inside the exhibition hall, and we also have the women program tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. We also have the women program tomorrow. Yeah, inside the exhibition, the exhibition hall, right? Yeah. Towards the end, you know, that way where you went for lunch, just before you get to that hall where you went for lunch on your right, inside the exhibition hall. I can't remember where ExxonMobil stand is, but I know it's towards the end. Yes. So please, ExxonMobil sponsored drink inside the exhibition hall. The dinner, the NNPC dinner is strictly by invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. But for now, proceed, please, very kindly to the exit.